And Natasha, and can you tell some of the stories of the women you work with and the unique barriers that women that are escaping domestic violence have to consider?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Sanctuary for Families, first we serve survivors of domestic violence, no matter what their immigration status is or regardless of their ethnic origin or nationality. However, but I work particularly with African survivors of domestic violence, so the great many of my clients are undocumented or have a varying form of immigration status, or were in status and now they aren't in status. And with that fluctuation oftentimes comes some of the barriers that we've already begun to talk about. So a great many of my clients either don't have any form of documentation so that they can prove their identity, so that they can even move forward and get a bank account if they wanted to. But then also looking at cultural norms, the ways that they have learned to save money or just their comfort zone with money is oftentimes quite different than the sort of setup and mandate that we have here in the U.S. And so oftentimes even the notion of saving money is a quite different sort of phenomenon for them. And it's oftentimes done in a collective setting as opposed to an individual setting. And oftentimes when you're breaking free of violence, you essentially have to become anonymous, moving into shelter, changing your address, sort of disconnecting yourself from your community or communities and some of the many people that you are more familiar with and comfortable with. You generally have to sort of break many of those ties, including the financial ones, in an effort to sort of start over. And so with that said, oftentimes there's this issue around identifying how to save money or even knowing that they should, because as we all know, economic abuse is also another form of domestic violence outside of some of the more physical forms. And so with that said, oftentimes many of my clients are not aware of how to save money. They don't know about bank accounts. They don't know about credit. They don't have a comfort zone at all with earning money and having earning capacity. They aren't necessarily familiar with how they can sort of acquire that knowledge and just sort of even become familiar with that vocabulary. Oftentimes, their identity has either been changed completely by the batterer, oftentimes particularly because of immigration documents. So he may give her another name in order for her to get here to the United States because he's borrowed someone else's identity that's a U.S. citizen or a legal permanent resident for her to get here. And so she may or may not know that. She may not even be aware of that. So she may actually be going around using her actual name where her documents say something completely different. Some of the other issues that come up, though, oftentimes particularly because of immigration reasons and looking at economics, is she may have appropriate travel documents, but because of the power and control, he takes them. So she has no access to them. So no access to her finances, no access to her ID cards or anything like that. And so if she needs them, she has to get them through him.
What exactly does your organization do? How are you trying to help women to address these financial obstacles and these challenging situations that they're finding themselves in?
You know, our issues are really around safety, but you know, it's really hard to ignore that oftentimes one of the motivating factors for clients to become safe is if they can also identify if they'll actually be self-sufficient once they leave, you know, a home of violence. Because, you know, although, you know, we may be telling them that here are your options, here are the things that you can do, you know, here are programs that can assist you, they don't know that. They know what's at home. Yeah. And so, you know, it's really a sort of daunting process to come in, you know, into a community with strangers who are telling you to leave your home, leave what you know, leave your familiarity, and come into this very new, completely isolated process for a little while so that you can sort of regain all of those systems. And so for us, it's partly us also bringing up those conversations around financial justice and financial issues at a much earlier point in the process, because again, our goal is to make sure that they're safe, but we also have to make sure that they're able to maintain that safety. And so it's really become a process where we've been able to sort of espouse financial literacy issues with safety and being able to have a conversation in that way.
Well, first of all, not many of our clients are employed as of yet. But basically, we encourage the ones that are started as credit union. And then also, if you have accrued debts, if you do have outstanding student loans, delinquent student loans, or if you had credit, you can work within the credit unions and they can help you to consolidate these loans. Make a $5 payment, but just make something to legitimize yourself.
Do you find that the women that you work with are finding barriers to employment because of a lot of these debt and credit issues?
Debts can also make it difficult to rent an apartment. And basically, yes, very much so. Very much so. Employment.
And it's something we have seen more and more, that more, landlords as well as employers now and other companies routinely check people's credit as a sort of a prerequisite to getting a job or to getting an apartment or whatever service it is that you're applying for. And it seems like building a financial identity and a credit history, in other words, getting into some debt is becoming part of what is needed now to participate in different facets of our society. And in both of your situations, it seems like, especially with dealing with, thinking of domestic violence survivors, building a financial identity may be the last thing someone wants to do.
Right. Even just for safety reasons.
Right.
Because they're just not necessarily
safety.
aware about, how far their batterer scope actually extends. And so it is more of a rare occurrence, but it definitely does happen at times where, a batterer has, resources that he can definitely access that could totally, jeopardize, her new financial status, even if he had already done or been successful at doing it once before.
Right.
And so there definitely are sometimes issues around that, safety issues around that, or even with many of my clients, particularly who are coming from immigrant countries, when and if their children are eligible for public assistance, or if they become eligible for public assistance, even accessing public assistance can sometimes be an obstacle for them, partly culturally because it's seen as a quote-unquote handout, and there are misnomers about whether or not it has to be paid back, or
right, or if it's going to harm your immigration
status, or whether or not it assigns some sort of stigma to you or to your children. Will it prohibit children from getting into certain schools that they want to get into? So there are lots of misnomers out there about public assistance, but even trying to have that conversation in a really sort of healthy way around that, sometimes being one of your first steps and becoming, much more financially literate and much more financially savvy can definitely be a daunting process for survivors of domestic violence, because even when you're looking at court proceedings, if there's issues around child support, you can't necessarily have public assistance as well. So there's lots of double-edged swords for women who are trying to definitely move forward in the process, trying to find ways to keep themselves and their children safe, trying to make sure that they're self-sufficient, but then also being, sort of caught between a catch-22 when looking at a variety of options, and really having to sort of play them against each other as opposed to being able to fully access as many services that are needed.
And that's what seems so hard, is how do you balance out, does it make more sense for me to, open a bank account to collect my, child support, or SSI benefits or whatever they're entitled to, or will it harm me in this other way? And so there is this big balancing act.
There's always a play between the two, and it's a case-by-case scenario, so I could never say to one particular group, absolutely access child support because your child is entitled to it, which that's absolutely true, where sometimes it might be more beneficial for you not to.
So Claudia, how do the issues that Natasha and Lorrayne are talking about, that they're describing, how do those play out with the hotline? How do they reflect the kinds of questions that the NEDAP gets through the consumer law hotline?
Well, we definitely hear calls from women who are in the particular situations that Natasha and Lorrayne are addressing. But I would say that in addition to that, we get many calls from women who just seem to be struggling to support their families and to make their rent or their mortgage payments and to pay off really like a tremendous weight of debt that seems to be really holding them back from being able to, in some cases, move apartments or get a better job or save for the future or achieve many of the goals that they want to achieve.